Okay, so what I'm going to talk about tonight, it's called dependent origination, or some people translate it as dependent arising, and it's basically the Buddhist schema on cause and effect. So dependent on A, B originates or B arises. So it's just the law of causality. And basically, dependent origination is an elaboration of the basic teaching of the Buddha, which is the Four Noble Truths. And the Four Truths is that suffering exists in the world. It's not the only thing that exists. There's beautiful, lovely things that also exist, but part of life inevitably is that there is suffering, and that the cause for this suffering is craving. So this can be a positive craving, like that you want something, or it can be a negative craving. There's something in your face that you don't want, and your wish is that it would go away. So it can be have a positive or negative valence. And then the third truth is the good news that we can end suffering. And the fourth truth is that the way to the ending of suffering is the Noble Eightfold Path. So now dependent origination, I've just abbreviated as DO. It's an elaboration of the Four Noble Truths. So suffering, the first truth, is step 12, the final step in dependent origination. So all the previous steps are explaining in detail how suffering comes about. And in the Four Noble Truths, craving is given as the cause. So it's actually step 8. So there's dependent origination gives 7 steps before that to explain how it arises. So the first step in dependent origination is ignorance. And this usually refers to ignorance of the Four Noble Truths, not understanding the Four Noble Truths. So you can also call it delusion, or not seeing reality, or wrong view. The second step in dependent origination are willed actions, called volitions. So this is the conscious or unconscious propulsion behind every physical action we do, everything we say, every thought we think. So a lot of things are on automatic pilot, but they're still considered to be willed. But it's habit energy that's driving them. And these willed actions are conditioned by our state of ignorance, like how awake are we, how clearly are we seeing reality, or how much are we deluded about reality. And so our willed actions are going to be conditioned by our state of ignorance. Now, a subcategory of willed actions are intentional actions, and these are what are called kama. So if, one of the examples that's always given is if you're walking along and you see a bug on the ground and you go, I'm going to kill that bug, and you stamp on it, then you've just created negative karma. But if you're walking along and looking at the scenery and you happen to step on a bug and you have no idea that you've stepped on that bug, then there's no negative karma that has been produced, because there was no intention to harm. And we can also produce positive karma as well. So when you're being generous and kind, then you're generating positive karma. Now, to understand these 12 steps of dependent origination, the Buddha explains it over 3 lifetimes, all of the factors are happening in every lifetime, but to make it sort of understandable, he explains it over 3 lifetimes. So step 1 and 2, so I'll just go back here. So step 1 was ignorance of reality, of this reality of the Four Noble Truths. And step 2 are then how we behave in our mind, in our speech, and in our actions. And so if we take that from 1 lifetime, then that conditions our rebirth consciousness in our, say, our current lifetime. So all our previous lifetimes, our degree of ignorance and all the actions that we took, physical, mental, speech-wise, they have conditioned our rebirth consciousness. So all that habit energy from our previous willed actions gets deposited in our little newborn baby self, along with the degree of ignorance that hasn't been transformed in a previous life. So that's step 3. So you can consider that the beginning of this lifetime. And then this conditions step 4, which we're born with a mind and a body. So we have physical and mental aspects, which lays the foundation for step 5, which are our 6 sense bases. So our eyes, ears, nose, taste buds, touch centers, and our mind, which allows step 6, which is contact. So this is the coming together of a sense object, like say scenery, with our sense base, our eyes, along with our consciousness. We have to be conscious and not unconscious. And then that, so having that sensory experience, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, that conditions the arising of step 7, which is a feeling tone, what we call Vedana. So every contact is simultaneously experienced as either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So we're not talking about elaborate feelings like anger or boredom or anxiety. This is just sort of a baseline feeling tone that comes along with every single sensory contact, like automatically at the same time. And then whatever that feeling tone is, here comes craving, step 8. So I want or I don't want. So if it's pleasant, then there's going to be, it's not necessarily, but that's the tendency is going to be, I want this, I want to have this, or I want more of this, or I don't want this to stop, or I don't like this, I want it to go away, I'm angry. So that's step 8, and then that conditions step 9, called taking up, upadana. So due to wanting, then we take up something. So we pick up some food to eat, or we learn to do something, or we buy something, or we take up a view on something. And then this conditions, step 10, our existence or our lifestyle. So due to our wants and what we take up, we create an existence, a lifestyle. So some of us live in the city and go to concerts and nightclubs. Some of us are in the mountains to ski and climb. And some of us might live on a boat, so there's lots of different lifestyles, and that's created by our wants. So that's, now we come to the next lifetime. So all of these things that have been happening, all the habit energies we develop in this lifetime, built upon our habit energies from countless previous lifetimes, and then any amount of transformation we've developed in this lifetime gets taken into our next rebirth. And of course, steps 1 and 2, that's ignorance. It's alive and well in this lifetime as well as the previous one. So that was our willed actions. Remember, ignorance and our willed actions, or sorry, yeah, willed intentions. So they continue to play out as well. And it's only if we wake up to our ignorance and make an effort to transform it by following the Noble Eightfold Path will we change all this habit energy and ignorance from steps 1 to 9 that otherwise endlessly go on from lifetime to lifetime. So now we take this whole mess of steps, whatever we've done with them from step 1 to 9 into our next lifetime. And so step 11 is our rebirth. So here we go again on the round of samsara. And what's the inevitable result of being born? Old age, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair, suffering. So here we finally end up with the first noble truth, suffering. But there's more. So it's harkening back to what I talked about last week. So the Buddha gives this is sort of the standard list for dependent or origination, those 12 steps. But then in other suttas, he talks about a list of things that are fuel for or nourishment or things that feed ignorance. So ignorance was step 1 in dependent origination. But prior to step 1, we have these 8 more factors. So the first factor is not associating with good people. So people who aren't moral, who act in an immoral way, or perhaps do, abuse drugs and alcohol, and they're very heedless. People always, who are just negative all the time, focusing on the cup half empty instead of the cup half full. Those who have trouble expressing kindness or generosity. So if you aren't associating with good people, that's going to certainly help keep the ignorance rolling along. The second factor is not hearing the teachings of the Buddha, the Dhamma. Because if we're ignorant and we don't hear about how to, other ideas or how to get out of this, then how can we transform? And then step 3, you might hear it, but is there any faith that gets developed? And remember, faith is on 2 levels. First of all, you hear it and it kind of sounds good, and you give it a try just based on what other people are saying. But then once you start practicing putting into practice what the Buddha's taught, then you get what's called confirmed faith, because you experience for yourself, hey, this is doing some good things, like some changes are happening in my life that are good. And so now you're not just relying on somebody else, yourself. So it's called confirmed faith. And then step 4 is careless attention. So focusing on the unwholesome instead of the wholesome. Step 5 is lack of mindfulness. So just not being aware of what you're doing moment by moment and not having a memory. Mindfulness has a memory component, remembering the things that you've been taught. And then clear comprehension is knowing what you're doing and why you're doing it, and if it's appropriate what you're doing. So the little story I was given that clearly sort of shows the difference between these two is they talked about a group of monks going from the monastery to the closest village with their alms bowls to receive their food for the day. and they were having to walk on the dikes, between the rice fields to get to the town. And so the lead monk was extremely mindful, lifting his foot, placing it, just being very mindful of walking, lifting, placing. But he wasn't clearly comprehending. The purpose of the walking was to go and get their alms food, and he walked right past the turn off to the village. So not only was he needed to be mindful of his walking, but he also had to have clear comprehension and of the fact that he was walking for alms food, and the village was over to the left, and he had to make a left-hand turn. Okay, next is non-restraint of the senses. So if every time something really pleasant or something comes into our awareness, and we're just really focusing on all of its positive aspects, then this can really start generating a lot of lust in us, like a lot of I want that, or I want to have that experience or have that object or whatever. Or if it's something unpleasant and we're just focusing on the negative aspects, bringing that to mind, we're really going to sort of start working ourselves up into a froth of anger or irritation or whatever. And so restraint of the senses is you're aware, but it's just sort of like hearing or seeing, and rather than focusing so minutely on positive and negative qualities. Number 7 is basically morality, the three kinds of this is immorality, the three kinds of misconduct of body, speech, and mind. And number 8 are the 5 hindrances: desire, ill will, dullness and drowsiness, restlessness and remorse, and then finally doubt. Now, if we want to transform our ignorance, we can put these points into their positive form. So number 1, associate with good people. So that's what we're doing tonight. We're getting together. We're interested in hearing what the teachings are of the Buddha. And if we're trying to follow those, we're trying to follow a moral life. And we certainly, each week here, we're hearing the Dhamma. And the Dhamma is so easy to access nowadays. There's so many monastics and lay people that are giving good talks on the Dhamma that are recorded on the internet. So we have wonderful access to hearing the Dhamma nowadays. And then number 3 is developing this confirmed faith in the teachings. And we do that by trying them out and then experiencing the benefits. And then this is what I said I want, because I figured I had steps 1 to 3. That was pretty good in my life. But I figured the first place where I needed more attention was on step 4, this wise attention, choosing the wholesome. So moment by moment, what am I thinking about? What am I doing? What am I saying? Am I making wholesome choices? So this is the little sign I have on my placemat, wise attention. Okay, the next thing that feeds into us letting go of ignorance is mindfulness and the clear comprehension. Being awake and aware in each moment, remembering the teachings and knowing what we are doing and knowing if it's appropriate. Sense restraints, as I said, not focusing on the beautiful aspects, so desire arises, or the negative aspects, so aversion or ill will arises. And then step 7, virtuous conduct of body, speech, and mind. And number 8, using the 4 right efforts to avoid or let go of the 5 hindrances. So, so you could choose any one of these points, if you wanted to, if you're trying to do everything, you just can't, it's hard to keep everything in mind. So you could just pick one thing here to, for a period of time to really focus on that and work with it, um, until that's become a strength, and then you could pick something else and work with that. So I decided to look at, okay, I chose to focus on wise attention. Let's see how that fits into um, the Noble Eightfold Path, because this is the fourth step of, this is the fourth noble truth. The way to the end of suffering is following the Noble Eightfold Path. So step one in that is right view, which is, again, understanding the path and being aware of it. And so it's because of my awareness of suffering that I want to focus on the wholesome. So I think that's I'm incorporating right view. So right intention. So right intention has three parts: intending not to harbor ill will, not to harm, and to renounce, which is to simplify our life. Or if we want to put it in positive terms, to generate loving friendliness, compassion, and to experience freedom from desires, contentment. Now, the reason it's put in these negative terms, intending not to harbor ill will, not to harm, and to renounce or simplify, is because we want to, at all moments, not be harboring ill will, and at all moments not to harm. So we're not every second of the day generating loving friendliness or compassion, but we should be really trying at every moment not to be harboring ill will and not to harm. And then in appropriate cases to be doing the others. And then again, how much we renounce or simplify, that's going to depend on how far along we are on the path. The further along, the more the wish is to simplify and then to experience that freedom, the freedom from desires. So if we look at my wise attention, then I'm certainly going to be trying to attend, is there any ill will that's arising and letting that go? Or is there any intent to harm? Or what about renouncing or simplifying? So I think my focusing on wise attention is incorporating the second step of the Noble Eightfold Path. Right speech, certainly if I'm wanting to have wise attention and focus on the wholesome, then I'm going to be focusing on right speech and right action, not wanting to harm. Right livelihood's referring to one's job and or livelihood, and I'm retired, but anyway, if I was working, this would certainly be affected by my wish to have wise attention. And then right effort has got the four parts. The first is to prevent unwholesome things from arising. That's basically the hindrances. And then if they have arisen, to abandon them. And then to develop the wholesome, which includes the 7 factors of awakening. And then to maintain and increase the wholesome once it's arisen. So certainly this is very related to my wish to focus on wise attention and choosing the wholesome. And then step 7 is right mindfulness of the body, of our feeling tone, of our mind states, and the Dhamma, the teachings of the Buddha, but in brief, the hindrances and the factors of awakening. And so certainly my wish to have wise attention is addressing that. And then finally, the 8th step on the Noble Eightfold Path is right Samadhi. So that's during the, that's our meditation practice. So it's not what's going to be happening moment by moment during the day, but certainly having wise attention and choosing the wholesome, there's not going to be any remorse in me when I sit down to meditate, and therefore it's going to be easier to develop stillness in my meditation practice. So just by choosing that one step, I'm encompassing the Noble Eightfold Path. Now let's see how it fits with the 7 factors of awakening. So mindfulness was part of the Noble Eightfold Path, so I've addressed that. The second factor of awakening is discriminating between what's wholesome and unwholesome, so I'm definitely doing that with my wise attention. So energy, I guess that would be something separate, but so energy is something that I'd want to generate to be able to have wise attention and focus on the wholesome. Now, these 3 things in the factors of awakening are, they're likened to pedaling the bicycle up the hill. So these are the things that we quote, do. The last 4 factors here, that's coasting downhill on your bicycle. These things just unfold on their own. When you've put in these 3 conditions, then the PT arises, and then this transforms into tranquility and moves into stillness, and then the final result of equanimity. So, so for me, choosing wise attention as a focus is covering the 7 factors of awakening as well. Okay, so I'm just going to put this back onto the sort of our potential list of things that one could focus on. So now, let me see if I can from here. I think I'm going to have to stop the share for a moment and then invite you to unmute so we can have our discussion. And then I'm just going to put the share back on so that so that this list is here. Okay. And I'm recording it so that it'll be available if you want to come back and look at the list. Okay. Oh. Questions, comments?
What is the difference between mindfulness and wise attention?
That's interesting. They've got it coming a little earlier here. That's a good question. Yeah, they certainly have different terms in the Pali, but there's probably a lot of overlap because our mindfulness, we want to be aware of the present moment.
Using the four right efforts to avoid or let go of the five hindrances.
Susan, you may want to put yourself on mute because you're you're talking to yourself. So you may just want to mute yourself momentarily. Yeah, so mindfulness is awareness of the moment and remembering what the teachings are. And then wise attention is just looking at, is what I'm doing wholesome, or do I have wise attention or unwise attention? Am I focusing on the wholesome or the unwholesome? So maybe it's a narrower, it's a narrower definition than mine.
Sense restraints, not focusing on the beautiful aspects. Sense restraints.
Is this? It's not clear for you, Susan. Is it blurry?
Is that Scott?
No, I don't think it is.
Oh, I know.
You need to maybe mute everyone, and then if somebody wants to speak, they could unmute, and then we don't pick up everybody's.
Okay, rustling. Okay, just hold on.
It's usually better, like, yeah.
Okay.
I find that Scott's computer.
Okay. Sorry, I just cut you off in mid-sentence, Corey. Okay, so everybody's muted, so just press unmute if you want to speak. Do you want me to keep that list up or just leave it so that we can see each other?
Sangamita, can you just go back to the page right before your list?
Sure. So just let me share screen again. Oh, my pages aren't turning now.
Yeah, step 3 was very interesting to me with the lifetimes and the habitual patterns that, you know, it was a lot to take in for me. So I'm definitely going to be going over this, but that was something very interesting.
Yeah, just a second. So is this the page that you wanted, Ryan, or the page before that?
Maybe the page before that.
This one here?
Okay, and then can you go to the next, to I guess page 7?
Oh, this is 5. Sorry, you wanted the one after. Is that correct?
Yeah, but and then yeah, maybe go to page 7. Okay, that's perfect.
Okay. Okay, sorry, what were you saying, Kelly?
I was just saying that it was step 3 was very interesting to me, and I can't quite even recall most of it because there was a lot to take in for me. I'm going to be going over it again, but basically the habitual patterns that continue to follow you, like energetically from lifetime to lifetime, and it's kind of cool.
You're aware of that.
Yeah, I know. That's why I was like hitting home for me, because it was correlating already with the work that I do. But I mean, it's beautiful, yeah. So I'm very excited to go over this and much slower and focus step by step, like you said, just one at a time, because that's kind of my head was spinning a bit there.
Yeah, it's a lot of dependent origination is not easy. two of the monks, Ajahn Brahmali and I forget the other monk's name, from the Buddhist Society of Western Australia, they did like about a week-long event on dependent origination. So, about 4 hours each day for about a week. And it's all recorded on the BSWA website. So that's about like over 20 hours, like a huge amount of hours of explaining just what I just went over in 15 or 20 minutes.
The BSWA.
Yeah, bswa.org, I think. And then just type in dependent origination workshop, and you'll get about over 20 hours of Dhamma talks on what I just talked about.
Sangamita, is the ignorance that's mentioned at the top of this page, so this is a list of things that feed that ignorance. Is that the same ignorance that is step 1 of the dependent origination?
Yeah, so these 8 things here are considered nourishment or fuel for ignorance. So these come before ignorance. So when he gives a dependent origination teaching, he starts with ignorance, but then in another teaching, he goes backwards and gives these 8 other things that fuel it, nourish it.
Now, I thought that in the first step of dependent origination, ignorance was more of an ignorance of the path.
Yeah, it's ignorant. Well, it's ignorance of the Four Noble Truths, and the Four Noble Truths are the truths of reality. The path is one part of that. It's the fourth truth, like this is the path that can take you out of suffering. But the Four Noble Truths are basically trying to talk about reality, because just think how often we distress ourselves by railing against reality. You go for a picnic and it rains, and then you're mad. But the reality is it's raining. There's no point fussing about it. Or you apply for a job and you don't get the job. Well, that's the reality. Or you're in a relationship and it falls apart, or your partner dies. That's the reality. And we tend to create so much suffering in our lives just because we're not accepting what is. This is the reality. So that's what ignorance is being ignoring reality.
Yeah, I feel like my ego is trying to push even harder right now. The more I try and crush it, it's the complaining mind is just so like in my face all day. And I'm not trying to push away the thoughts or change them and just hold space. But it's just like it needs an identity, and it's mad that I'm trying to crush it.
Yeah. And what Ajahn Brahm really emphasizes is, instead of trying to crush it, because that takes a lot of willpower and is exhausting, and you get exhausted, you just get exhausted. He's saying use the wisdom power. Look at how much suffering that's creating. When your mind is focusing on all of that negativity, this is where you want to feel that hot coal in your hand. And when you really see how much suffering it's causing you, and it's not advancing you, it's not getting you anywhere, then when you feel that hot coal burning your hand, then like yikes, you just drop it. You don't have to use any willpower. So see if you can start looking at it that way a little bit, and then maybe it'll be less tiring. and more effective.
Yeah, I'm not identifying with it anymore or acting it out.
Yes.
It's just, I'm just noticing that it's becoming more restless the more I'm trying to just sit, you know. It's but yeah, definitely.
So, yeah, just feel the suffering of that restlessness.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then your mind hopefully will just go, yikes, this is I don't want this.
Sangamita, could ignorance also be a form of not looking at impermanence and not looking at the reality of change? Would that be another way to?
Yeah, absolutely, because it's not looking at reality, and impermanence is part of reality, for sure.
Sangamita, I just want to say, like, this was such an amazing, like, summary of everything. And it's really nice to kind of have everything, like, I really like how you put everything in, like, layperson words so you can understand, and going through things, like, in a summarized fashion. I found it super helpful. So thank you so much for doing that. Because I've heard some of these concepts here and there, and I grew up in a Buddhist country, but I feel like I learned more Buddhism in the last 15 minutes than like 15 years or something. And that's really nice. And I was thinking, like, when you were saying right livelihood,
Yes.
and that you're retired, but like this work you're doing right now, like just giving us dharma, like what better livelihood is there, right?
Right. Well, you can thank Ryan for asking the question last week. Okay, we're getting near the end. Yes, Ryan?
Well, I was just going to say, Mary, thank you very much for putting so much effort into this. I am very appreciative. And this ignorance, if I'm not mistaken, Ajahn Sona quite often uses the term of ignorance instead of in the place of craving as the second noble truth. Is that correct?
Just I'm not sure if have you heard a talk by him where he does that?
Yeah, I feel that I have where he used ignorance, but like I say, I could be mistaken, but it does kind of align with
yeah, it fits because it's just an earlier
manifestation of that. Yeah.
It comes earlier than in craving in the whole scheme. Yeah.
So no, this has been very, very enlightening. Thank you very much.
Okay, any other questions before we do our ending here?